Hello and welcome, it's Leon Street, and today I'm going to be speaking about the 10 reasons why your business is struggling and what you can do to fix it fast. Now, at this particular moment in time, there's a lot of things going on in the marketplace, and we're currently going through worldwide and globally something called the coronavirus. It's starting to spread, it's getting around the world, and it's putting people in panic. And rightly so, there are different things that people are taking precautions around because it's a health risk. But more importantly, if you're a business owner, how do you take stock of what's going on in the world and then take your business to the next level to make sure that you are growing, to make sure that you are taking care of what needs to be done, bills, new clients, invoices getting paid, all of those things? Well, that's what these 10 steps, these 10 reasons are all about. So once we tackle these reasons, you'll be able to fix going from struggling or stagnant or probably in a not so secure place to go into that next level. So I'm Leon Street. If this is the first time you've tuned in and watched any of my videos, make sure you like, comment below this video and subscribe to be notified of any new videos. That means you've got to click on the bell icon and you'll get the new videos first. So we're going to get into these 10 reasons why your business is struggling, because what I want ultimately is for you to get beyond struggling so that you can go to that next level, because I'm sure you want to grow. You don't want to struggle. No, I'm only messing with you guys, but in reality, nobody wants to struggle. So let's get into this. So the reason number one is problems. Now, when I say problems, it isn't what you're thinking. The key thing here is to understand the problems of your audience. And then sometimes this is where people get kind of messed up. They kind of mix this one up. You see, your problems of your audience, even the problems of your audience, there is only one. And I will tell you what I mean by that. There is only one key problem. One key problem. You see, what happens is business owners like you and me, especially when we're not too I would say exposed to marketing, or we're not marketers, but obviously I'm a marketer, I've learned from this. But what happens is you start to get obsessed with, my customers have got so many different problems. But in reality, your customers have probably got one type of problem that you as a business fix. But what they do have is many symptoms, and this is where people get mixed up. You see, if we're going to take problems and symptoms and kind of just break it down for a second, let me give you the quick analogy of what symptoms are. So imagine somebody has the problem of the flu, or something like the coronavirus. Well, the symptoms of the flu are going to be runny nose, blocked up nose, achy joints, high temperature, probably not feeling too well, headaches, you name it, coughs, sneezes, all those types of symptoms. But what happens is often business owners get mixed up and they confuse those symptoms and think, they're all the problems they have. But actually the overarching problem of all those symptoms is the flu, right? So if you look at your business, what you've got to do is understand what is the problem, the number one problem of your audience, and what are the symptoms. Get very clear, because what I find is a lot of business owners have their product, have their service, and they think that's what people want, that's what people need. No, what people want is to get rid of their problem, or problems as they see it. But actually what you're now kind of clued up around is that they have a number of symptoms and they have one problem. So let me break it down just to give you another example. So if I was helping a business owner who had a marketing problem, the different symptoms they may be experiencing is not having a clear marketing strategy, or not even knowing where to start, not being able to be successful with Facebook ads, Google ads, not really knowing what kind of message to create in their copy, how to put funnels together. All of these things are symptoms of a marketing problem, not being visible enough in front of the right customers. So what you've got to do is identify your customer's number one problem and what are all the symptoms. And just so you know, when it comes to symptoms, you should be aiming, and I say aiming, for around 5 to 10 just to get you started, because a lot of people, they don't even know the difference, but now you do. So that's reason why you're struggling, number one. Number two, what you've got to do is, now that you understand the problem that your audience have and the symptoms that they have, you need to get very clear on who the audience actually is. So what this means is you have to dive into a niche. Niche is an alternative way to describe a portion or a section of a market that you ultimately will serve, or you choose as your customers that sorry, not your customers, your target audience that you will serve. So the two ways that you do this is, first, you must identify the demographics, and demographics are I would say the kind of normal attributes that most people think of. And I'll just write it here, so it's attributes. Yeah. And so when I say attributes, think of age, location, education level, income level, revenue that the business generates if you're going for a business to business audience. Maybe part of your demographics is that the fact that you're going for a business to consumer audience, more general public. These are critical things you need to understand, and the reason why you need to understand these is because you will start to really look at a focused section of that audience. And when you go for an age range, I always advise my clients to look within a 10-year age range and start there. Now, as you become more successful in that niche, you can then start to expand it out into other age ranges within that particular market, so you're growing into other niches. That's step one, demographics. Step two is you've got to look at what are the psychographics, and you're probably thinking, what the hell, psychographics? Well, if you break it down and get rid of graphics, it's psycho. And no, your audience aren't psycho. But you've got to psychologically understand who they are. What you need to then define is, what are the reasons why they will buy from you? So you can start with things like, what keeps them up at night? What are they fearful of? What will happen if they don't get the solution to the problem or the symptoms they're experiencing? What will be the consequences? So what you're doing is clearly identifying the attributes, and then secondly, if I can find the right pen, going into the psychographics, understanding the psychological reasons and the emotions that are driving your niche into the actions that they're taking. So get clear on problems, number one. Number two, niche, very important. And guys, if any of this isn't clear, or you've got some questions and you're like, Leon, how do we go deeper into this? Remember to drop a comment below this video. This is something that I help my clients with, business owners, coaches, consultants, people who are struggling with marketing. That's what I help them to fix, so they can go on and grow their business and stop struggling, which is what all these points are about. One of the key things people come to me for is coaching. I offer group coaching, I offer workshops, in-person workshops that I hold in Birmingham and London in the UK. So if you do need to fly in, or you're in the UK already, you can travel down, just comment below and I'll let you know when the next upcoming workshops are. Reason number three is brand. Now, you may have heard this, you may even, think you know what your brand is, but there's a quote that I like to paraphrase from Jeff Bezos, the CEO, the owner of Amazon. Now, he says, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So I like to look at your brand as your promise, and there's a lot of companies out there who have something called a brand promise. So if people are going to say great things about you when you're not in the room, well, they're going to say it because you make a promise that you live up to. And that's one of the critical pieces that you need to look at with your brand. And what I quite often see is that along with your promise, what you need to state is what, if I can write this, you stand for. Yeah. So with your brand, you need to clearly identify, put here way, just realize, what you stand for. And the flip side of that, what you also need to get very clear on when it comes to your brand is what you stand against. Now, you need to have this clearly defined somewhere. And the reason for this is when people come across your business, whether you're a service-based business, coach, consultant, it doesn't matter, small business owner, this works time and time again. I've used it many times in many different niches and industries. Get clear on your promise, i.e., what is your promise to help your audience fix the number one problem they have or solve the symptoms of that problem? Does that make sense? So what do you stand for, and put down what you stand against when it comes to what your niche are experiencing with that problem, and maybe some of your competitors or the bad practices in your industry. Get clear on these, guys. So reason number four, you're probably struggling in your business and how to fix it is product. So if you don't have any physical products or anything and you just deliver a service, well, it's the same thing, product and service. So there are 4 P's when it comes to your product. P number one, is product description. Yeah, so start with the product description. Write down a short paragraph of what your key or your signature product or service is. Write it out. The reason for that, because if you can't write it out, you clearly don't understand and you haven't defined your product clearly enough. And it's so important that you understand this. Number 2. So you got product, you got price. Yeah, so price. How does your product price in the marketplace? Yeah, so you've got to look at what are your competitors selling, you know, what's the price, what are people already buying in the marketplace. Understand price. After price, you've got placement. So where will your product be placed? So you've got to think about, you know, the different places, what channels, where will you put this stuff, where will you list, where will you market, where will you put that product when it is ready, or if it is ready already, you know, what channels maybe haven't you considered. And it's so important, because I see a lot of people who skip past this and they don't really get into it. And then number 4 is packaging. Yeah, so how is it packaged? Are you clearly showing the true value of what your products and services offer? If it's a physical product, how is it wrapped? How is it packaged? I know, for instance, Amazon, you know, they introduced the hassle-free packaging not long ago, a few years back. And it's because what they realized is people didn't need to, you know, unwind, unscrew all different toys when they're buying them for their kids, because their products aren't on shelves. So they started to ask toy suppliers to stop putting them into the bright, shiny boxes with all the stuff, you know, kind of taped in, wired in, screwed in. They wanted hassle-free packaging. But how can you package your service? You know, how does it appear? Do you create mock-up images so people can see your products online? They can get a kind of intrinsic or perceived value or perceived feeling of ownership before they even have the service or product. So look at your 4 Ps, guys. Very critical. I see a lot of businesses who've been doing the same thing day in, day out, years on years, 10 years in a row, 20 years in a row, and they haven't changed or even reanalyzed what's going on with their product. So do that, guys. Sometimes your product isn't fit for the problem or the symptoms of your audience because the market has changed. So reason number 5, look at your offer. Your offer is different to your product. When a product isn't selling, it's not a problem always with the product, but I can tell you what, it's usually a problem with the offer. Yeah, because the offer is all about how you take that product that you have put a description to, you've put a price to, you've put package to, you've put placement to, but you haven't created an irresistible offer. And an irresistible offer is all about knowing what's in it for me in terms of your audience, your niche. What's in it for them? How is it going to help them get past the symptoms and the problems they're experiencing? You know, will they see the real value of it before they own it? And will they see the perceived value, so the future ownership of what your product or service will help them to do in their life or business? It's critical. You've got to explore these things. The next part in your offer is clearly identifying what objections are people going to come up with when they're in the position where they want to buy your product or service. You know, there's so many different objections you'll face, but can you describe already how to answer those objections? Like, it costs too much, it won't work for me, I've got to think about it, I've got to ask my partner, I've got to ask a friend. You know, there are all these different types of objections that you're going to face. So get clear on that. That's going to help you to solidify what your offer is, so people can see the real and perceived value. And more importantly, they will already feel and go to a place where they're thinking about owning what you have as a product or service. Reason number 6 that you may be struggling and how to overcome it fast is looking at your channels. We covered part of that in the product part in the placement, but what you've got to really look at is what marketing channels can you get your product and service out on. What you've got to do is look at using tactics. You know, the tactics are the actual marketing activity. Look at your channels, you know, look at the places like the usual outlets, Facebook, you've got places like LinkedIn, you've got YouTube, there are others like Google. So you're going to be looking at all these places, all these common top places that we all use, Instagram, Twitter, whichever one you feel like you want to get into. What I usually do is roll with 2 main channels. My main ones at this point in time are LinkedIn and Facebook. I also I'm saying LinkedIn and Facebook. My main ones are LinkedIn and YouTube, but what I do on Facebook is I run paid ads. Just like I run paid ads through Google that get my my ads out onto YouTube also. So get very focused in on what channels are you going to work with. For me, like I said, my priority ones for organic, where I just share great content and I don't run any paid ads, are YouTube and LinkedIn. But where I do run paid advertising because I want to get more reach is on Facebook and Google. And the reason why I do it on Facebook is because it gives you more reach. They also own Instagram, so I can get my ads onto Instagram. And with Google, they own YouTube, so I can get my ads onto YouTube as well as onto the Google search engine. So I'm just going to put here paid ads. Paid ads are going to give you greater reach. You won't get it organically other than places like LinkedIn and YouTube, but this gives you reach if you want to get there a bit quicker. So look at your channels, guys. If you're only marketing or relying on things like, I don't know, maybe word of mouth, you might even be doing events, you know, so your channels might be offline. So it could be, because I do a lot of these, I do workshops as well. So let me just get this in. So workshops / events. All of these are channels, guys. Make sure you explore them. If you've only got one channel, you're leaving yourself open to failure, because, you know, if something, for instance, I run workshops right now, the coronavirus is doing the rounds. What have I got to look at? I've got to change from doing just workshops to doing more webinars, so online seminars where people can view them, the content that I have, from the comfort of their own home or from their office. You know, running paid ads, you know, if for instance something happened with an account and my account got closed down, then what I need to look at is, do I have other channels that I can use? And vice versa. If things change on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Google, Instagram, Twitter, all these places, can I adapt? Can I come back? Can I get my message out to that niche as fast as I need to? Yeah. So if you're reliant on one, you're leaving yourself open to failure. So reason number 7 that you are probably failing: sales. You know, I come across so many business owners who say, you know what, Leon, I don't want to be salesy. I don't want to be pushy. Don't be then. So what I would say when it comes to selling, get clear on what you think is bad about selling, and then get equally clear on what you think is good about selling. Yeah. And so all the crappy bad stuff, yeah, all this stuff here that you identify, just create a list, write it all down. Go to here, go to the good stuff, and what you've got to do is move to this place. And here's how I look at selling. Yeah. Selling is your duty, because reason number 1 is that you know your niche have a problem with symptoms, and the only way they're going to get a great experience to overcome that problem is when you sell to them using the good sides of selling. What's good about selling? So I want you to be the best salesperson in the world, because you have integrity and you know that your product is there to help your clients overcome the symptoms and the problem that they're experiencing. The only time that people don't enjoy selling or sales is because they don't see the connection between their product or service helping somebody who has a problem that they're ready to pay you for. It's not about being pushy, guys. All the bad stuff about sales, bin it. All the good stuff about sales, own it. Right? Reason number 8 why your business may be struggling and how to overcome it fast is you don't have a dashboard. And the dashboard is very simple. You don't know your numbers. So you need to know your critical numbers. Yeah. So you're going to be looking at things like leads. Yeah. You're going to be looking at prospects, especially when it comes to marketing. And you're also going to be looking at clients. Yeah. So actual, how many clients do you attract in? Then you're going to be looking at cash flow. Yeah. Yeah. So looking at actual cash in the bank. The other thing that you need to therefore take a look at when it comes to your dashboard is what's going on with your accounts. Yeah. And in particular, profit. These are some of the critical numbers that you need to start with when it comes to your business. So leads, prospects, clients. Cash flow, as they say, is king. Make sure you got cash in the bank. And when it comes to accounts, look at the profitability of your business. And remember, that starts with your products and services. So take a look at your dashboard. We're going in for the final two, guys. Guys, if you're enjoying this, remember to drop a comment below. Let me know that it's good stuff. Also, give me a thumbs up. I really enjoy doing this stuff and I hope you're enjoying it too. So, ta-da! Reasons 9 and 10, the final two. You. So if you're the business owner or you are a director or you're an employee of a business and you're thinking, I want to use these 10 steps, these 10 reasons to go to the next level, either for my boss or you are the boss and you want to take your business to that next level. Point 9 and point 10. And I've left these two to the last on purpose, because all the other stuff are probably things that you kind of had an idea that, yeah, those are the things I do need to fix, and maybe Leon's picked up on some new stuff I hadn't considered. But you, one of the biggest things. Look, guys, if you're the business owner, it's very simple. If you're not in the game, your business is not in the game. And if your business is not moving forward, it's only doing one thing, it's going backwards, it's dying. You have to focus on your mindset. And what I say when it comes to mindset is you need a winning mindset. You have to be in this place where you're focused on winning. And the winning part is helping more people get your products, get your services so that they can get the answers to their problems and the symptoms they're experiencing. I like to take on this phrase: ownership, accountability, and responsibility. Yep. Ownership, accountability, and it spells OR. So once you take on ownership, accountability, and responsibility, you get rid of blame, excuses, and denial, which is bed. So rather than be in bed, I want you guys to be awesome. Yeah, so that's what you got to take on board. The other thing when it comes to mindset, you know, focusing on winning, focusing on accountability, ownership, and responsibility is vision. You got to have a vision. Yeah, some of the greatest leaders in the world are visionary people who had a dream, people who thought greater than where they are, you know, people who just wanted something better, something bigger, something that would take things to the next level, either for themselves, the community, or for, you know, people in the world. Be led by the vision, guys. The vision is something you see, and there is a definition, and the one that I usually use is from, it's either the Oxford or the Cambridge Dictionary, but it's almost like a supernatural phenomenon of seeing something in the future. Get that? And some of the most famous people we look up to as heroes, these people are using vision in their language and talk about vision as they grow their business. So you must be led by your vision. Why? Because your vision is going to be greater than anything that you have achieved up until now and lead you to something even greater, far beyond even when you're on this planet anymore. So that's reason number 9. And number 10, this has to be one of the biggest things for any business owner. You need to get yourself a coach or mentor. And I'll tell you why. And you're probably wondering, what is this little picture that Leon has on the screen? And I'm going to tell you why. Here it is. You need a coach or a mentor because when you're in the frame, you can't see the picture. Yeah? And that's the problem with a lot of us in business. We're looking, but we're in the frame. We can't see the picture. And so the key thing is when you have a coach or mentor, they see the angles you can't see. They see because either they have experience of dealing with those things or they can offer you that perspective, that understanding of what you need to know that maybe you're missing, maybe you're 1 degree off, half a degree off, but a coach or mentor is what will put you back on track, guys. They will help you to go to the next level. And that's ultimately what you need to help with the accountability, responsibility, and ownership. Because when you are embodying all those things, you need a coach or mentor to help you to that next stage. You know, some of the most famous entrepreneurs in this world all had coaches. So people like Richard Branson, his mentor was Sir Freddie Laker. You've got people like Bill Gates, his mentor was Warren Buffett. You then have people like, let me think of somebody else, Mark Zuckerberg. He was mentored by Steve Jobs, the owner of Apple, when he was still alive. So all of these people count. Oprah Winfrey, her mentor was Maya Angelou. So guys, you need a coach or mentor, and if you need one, probably come and speak to me. That's what I help people to do. I am a visionary marketing coach. So finally, guys, it wouldn't be right if I knew you guys had problems problems with your business in terms of getting it moving, getting your marketing to the next level if I didn't make an offer to you. As I said, I'm a visionary marketing coach and I help people through my Vortex coaching program. Now, if you are struggling in your business right now and you're thinking, you know what, I love all these things that you're talking about, Leon, but I'm still stuck in a bit of overwhelm. I'm not exactly sure where to start, or actually I've started some stuff and I need somebody to take a look at it. You know, somebody who can see the picture, somebody who can look outside of the frame where you're stuck. Well, what I would love for you to do, guys, is get in touch with me. Simply go to this link that I'm about to share with you, and it's www.leon, so Leon, street, and it's STRTTE, yeah, .com. And I want to say after that, after .com / more leads call. Go to that link, www.leonstreet, there's an E on the end of street.com / more leads call. Go to that link, fill in the form, and you will hear from me personally. And I will show you the exact steps you need to take your business from struggling to moving to the next level fast. Why? Because I've done it so many times. I've helped people generate 6 figures, 7 figures, go from being broke to cash flowing, you know, out of their pockets, out of their ears. And that's what I would love for you guys. More importantly, if you've enjoyed this video, if there's a topic maybe you want me to deep dive in more, let me know. The link to the call booking form will be in the description as well below this video. Or if there's anything else you're just struggling with and you want some help, remember guys, I'm here to help, so just reach out to me. Thank you for watching, and make sure to like, comment below, subscribe, and click on the bell notification icon to get the new videos first. It's Leon Street, and I look forward to catching you on the next video. Bye-bye.